Here's what I want to do over the next few weeks, and I don't know where how all we're gonna end up, but I want to talk about renewal. Actually, this is not my idea. Nathan had this idea a year ago in the spring while we were in the middle of a series, and he was like, "We'd be really good to talk about renewal or being renewed in this time of spring." I was like, "Yeah, that's great. How about next year?" So here we are. Let's start with a story. This is a weird place to start any series. Every once in a while, my kids and I, when we're at bedtime, I'll ask them a question. Would you like to learn anything new tonight? And sometimes they will give me an answer. And sometimes I'll provide them with something. But it's always weird. It's always weird. Like, like some disease or something, like, or stars or something like that. Anyway, I had a nice tip from Andy, who's in the back with kids, and he sent me an article. He says, check this out for one of your nights in the learning. And what I do is I take an article. This is brilliant. Parenting pro tip right here. You take an article that they genuinely want to learn about, and then you read it to them. But it's like super complicated and boring, and so they fall asleep before you're ever done. And then you can talk about it the next day, how cool it was you learned about such and such. So we learned about why barns are red one night. Anyone? Barns, yeah, you know, barns. Oh, that's painful. Any, like, for renewal. So here's how this story goes. Millions and millions of years ago, a star dies in a nearby galaxy. And as it dies, it collapses in on itself, and it creates so much pressure. You didn't know this was coming, right? And it creates so much pressure that it creates new elements. And as more pressure forms, only the larger stars can create these heavier elements. As more pressure forms, heavier and heavier elements are formed in the process of this star. And then it explodes into the galaxy. One of those elements, one of the most common elements that occurs in that process is the element that we get, iron. So iron is prevalent on Earth because of these stars and how prevalent it is as an element in our universe, then oxidizes and creates a red tint to it. That's cheap because there's a lot of it. And so you mix it with some oil and you make a paste and you put it on your barn wood to protect your barn, and it costs you nothing. So barns are red because it's cheap and it protects the wood and it's helpful. Why are we starting here? I don't know. It worked in my head. Here's how this works. Our lives, our universe, everything we look at is built around this process of renewal. A star disappears, dies in the process, but creates new things. It creates elements, say carbon, that are heavy enough to create you and me. It creates iron in the process that gives life to something else as it goes. Our universe functions this way. And so as we look out into the world, our bodies are tuned to this process of renewal, of ups and downs and seasons of times of struggle and times of hope. Our bodies are tuned to this process. In fact, we look out into the world and we recognize seasons, and we recognize seasons of growth and seasons of decay. But it's not bad. Decay isn't bad. It brings life something new in the season that comes next. And so I thought a lot about, in time, thinking through this stuff, I've thought a lot about the process of creativity. Because what you look at is you destroy something or something breaks down and something new sprouts out of it. You do this in your own life. You change a job, you change a career, you introduce new life into your family or the world, and the world changes. In the process, it destroys, it's a rough word, it destroys something old while creating something new. This is very familiar language for us, right? And so I thought a lot about this process of God occurring in our universe. This God of creativity. This God that is the process of something old becoming something new, and something that looks lifeless actually being the lifeblood of something else. I don't know how far I want to go with that. There's this guy, Kaufman, that actually wants to define God as creativity. It says if we let go of the image of some human-like structure or being, and we think about God as creativity, we can see God working in our world in a whole different way. Not with fingers and hands moving things and planting or sprouting something, but literally the lifeblood of the universe as it breathes in and out and creates and sees decay and creates something new. This is how he defines God and talks about God. It's actually really beautiful. So when we were on the process, man, if you guys have done this, most of you, named a child, it is brutal. So many things to think about, and how are kids going to shorten it, and like, what are those like rough moments in grade school going to be, and your own grade school where a kid who was named X or Y did this to you, like all of these things are going on in your head, right? We turn to Hebrew. It's one of my first loves in studying the Bible is the language. And despite the fact that you can say things like Tweakin' Teakin, we named him Teakin anyway. We pulled the name from a Jewish phrase, tikkun olam, that means to renew or repair or restore the world. The other day, he and his brother were talking about their names, and Chaim remembered something about Teakin's name, and he said, "Your name means," and he tells him, but he tells him the wrong thing. And I didn't know how Teakin was going to respond, but he says, "No." He's gotten very feisty. He says, "No, my name means to repair the world." And then he corrects that, and he defines it further. He says, like, to make the world a better place. And then yesterday, he's still following up on this from a few weeks ago. He says, and that means I'm going to make you better. And he points to his brother and says it directly. It's like, man, he gets it. So the concept there is that we've done a lot of damage, right? And we need our next generation to do some repair work, some renewal work. And that is part of the lifeblood, part of the process of generations living out their calling in the world to repair and bring forth new life as they grow and age and do new things. And there's another piece of that. I've been sort of on this bandwagon or something for a couple of years now of taking the Lord's Prayer. And there's one line that I think gets overlooked because I think because we spiritualize it. I feel like I've been using that word a lot, but I think because we take it out of the realm of a literal meaning, we just gloss over it. The phrase is, "May your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven." And if there's one thing we wanted Tekin to identify with as he ages into his name is my job, my purpose, my role in life is to take what God has taught and is doing and to bring it down here into the real world. And to be that place of renewal in this culture, community, society, whatever words you want to put there. If we can take that phrase and understand it as a literal, we are called to bring this about, to pray for, to bring life to this question of God's kingdom, God's love, God's grace, God's compassion, God's beauty into our place in life now. The world is renewed through us, not to be antagonistic, not for some future glory, but for a current realization of what God is doing in our world. These kinds of things. So over the period of the next few weeks, I want us to look at a few different passages, and we'll do a couple right now as we before we dig further into them. But we closed a series last week, The Upside Down. And what we were trying to pull out of that series was this overturning of culture and society and place in life and everything that Jesus was doing. And ironically, we take this letter from Paul of Colossians, where it appears that he is attempting to root out any other kinds of language or words or worldviews. And we looked at how Paul was sort of breathing hope into the life of this church. And in that first chapter, he speaks of Jesus, and he says, "For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile himself to all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross." So we're going to interchange reconcile with renew in a little bit of how God is working in the world. And not just an individual, not just a church, but all of creation. We're going to move to Romans chapter 8 in a little bit, and we're going to see in that process the whole earth longing, all of creation. Let me say that a little differently. All of creation, for the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not voluntarily, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay. See, there's the cycle of our world, from the bondage of decay, and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. So what you're experiencing is what the earth is waiting to experience with you. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. Not only creation, but we ourselves have the first fruits of the Spirit grown inwardly while we wait for adoption. Now we have a few babies on the way right now. And those labor pains are real, I've been told. That's what I've been told. But they have a purpose. It's not just pain and suffering. It's not suffering for suffering's sake. The whole earth, the image that is here, the whole creation that has been groaning in labor pains is not just pain. He's not just calling out a world in suffering. He's calling out a world in suffering for a purpose of new life. Just like labor pains brings new life. That's the breath in and out of creation, of God's work, creative work in our world. This piece of renewal that we watch in and out, the seasons changing. One of our favorite children's books is the story of a fox and all his friends in a forest. And this little red fox is getting tired and old, and one day he lays down and goes to sleep. And it's winter time, and so the scene is a scene of winter, of decay, of coldness. And his friends of the forest gather around him and tell stories about him. And as springtime comes, they continue to tell stories from him. And a sprout grows from the place where the fox laid down. And then a tree, and it gets bigger and bigger with these beautiful red leaves and makes a home for other animals in the forest. And they continue to tell stories about the fox. Out of this dark, cold moment comes a story about beautiful life. This is God's story. Last week we celebrated the death and resurrection of God, of Jesus. And I think it's not hard to see the connection that we're drawing here, right? It's not a long, big jump to see God's story literally telling of death, burial, and new life. Out of that story comes the church. Out of that story comes new creation. This is God's story. At its core, at its heart, this process of renewal is God's story. When we sat down to name my first son, we had everything on the books. We had probably 5 or 6 girl names. But then it wasn't a girl. And so that was useless. And then we had, I guess it wasn't useless. We just weren't thinking outside the box. And then we worked slowly and steadily. Any of you working on names? You're working on names. You're not. Oh, that's not right. That's not right. Okay. Have you read the name books? There's like hundreds of name books, and they're not like 30 pages. They're hundreds of pages, and they're just lists of names. Jewish names, Christian names, Hindi names, names from the United States, names from Africa. It goes on and on and on. And that the story we settled on, because again, we wanted this name to tell a story for our kids and for their future. And the story we settled on was God's story of life. And so quite literally we named him Life, Chaim. It's the Hebrew word for life. But in the context of God's story, life comes with purpose. It comes with God's work involved. It comes with a story of God moving through creation and through the story, and sometimes there is suffering, and out of that comes new life. But always God is working in that place of creativity, in that place of new life. I don't think he's caught all of that nuance yet, but he will. And he'll be able to tell that story as he goes forward into the world. This is our story. This is God's story of life and renewal. A God of creativity, a God of joy, a God who suffers with us in the dark moments, and a God who rises with us in the moments of overwhelming love and excitement and newness. Those labor pains bring forth new life. So here's the question. Here's the question to go with today. Is how do you walk out of these doors and grasp the season that we are in of new life, of new creation, the season of renewal, the season of birth and excitement and freshness in the world? How do you turn that into a way of living? That's ultimately what we're trying to do as a church community, is how do we go out and live and breathe that space and that love, that joy of renewal. And some of you aren't there today, and that's okay, because seasons come that are down and seasons come that are up. And interestingly, they don't always match what's outside. But we are always looking for how do we tell or share or show, express God's message of new life in the world around us. That's what we're trying to do. So maybe go take Romans 8 or Colossians 1 and read it each day. Start your day with Romans 8 and the labor pains of creation. How do you breathe in the world and exhale love and new life?